Welcome, everybody. I am Dr. Paul Schatzberger, and this is Reverend Dr. Scott Williams. I had the privilege of acting as Scott's dissertation advisor for his dissertation titled Implementing Disciple-Making Movement Practices in the Wesleyan Church, Discovery Bible Study as a Disciple-Making Tool. Scott's research was autoethnographic. That is, he interviewed participants, but he also included his own perspective as someone ordained in the Wesleyan Church. Hey, Scott, congratulations on finishing your dissertation.
You're too good. You know what? This was a victory for the both of us. I was so grateful that you served in such a myriad of roles in providing help with this. And truly, I would not be sitting here if it weren't for you sitting there. And this is a victory for the both of us. So thank you, thank you, thank you for your help. This was an amazing study.
It was. So, what first led you to study disciple making movement, or DMM, as we call it? Why did this question stay with you for so long?
I don't know. I think it was so unique when I was exposed to the disciple making movement back in 2006 in my first stint in seminary when I was studying missions, cross-cultural church planting. And I saw it in Kenya. I witnessed it happening the year after that I spent living in Kenya. And it always is in the back of my mind. I wonder, is this possible in America? If it is possible, what would it look like in America? And it just kind of marinated back there through the years. And it wasn't until we met, over 10 years ago now. And I think not long after Sheep Among Wolves, the documentary, one of them was released. And mentioned it to you one day, and I remember you resonated with that. You were familiar with the term, and I thought, oh, a kindred spirit. We started talking about it, thinking about it. It's still in the back of my mind, and imagine my shock when a mutual friend and acquaintance of ours plants a disciple-making movement church here in the upstate of South Carolina. And that's when it really got good.
So, your dissertation focused on Discovery Bible Study within a Wesleyan church plant. How do disciple making movement and Discovery Bible Study relate to each other?
This was a helpful distinction. I just kind of looked at disciple-making movement, the whole thing, bring it in. We want it all just the way it comes, just straight on, knowing that it contained several markers that they used to explain, missiologists did, what they witnessed in the late 90s in India, in China, in the early 2000s. Then I began to realize that Discovery Bible Study was really one of the big change agents of the disciple making movement, and that Discovery Bible Study was this very clear, very easy, very replicable process that allowed believers, allowed seekers, allowed strangers to the Bible to experience Scripture for themselves, to experience it in a discerning community, and to listen to the Spirit of God as He led them. It contained discovery, it contained camaraderie, family, um, relationship, and also actionable items that allowed individuals to see the truth of the scripture and put that truth into practice in their lives. And so, for us, Discovery Bible Study was such a huge aspect that I think it kind of started out as let's take disciple making movement as a whole. And then realizing Discovery Bible Study is such a big element. All of the other elements are very important, but for us, that one was really foundational. And we kind of zeroed in on that, especially with conversations with participants.
Mhm. And you found that participants often experience belonging before obedience. How does that challenge traditional assumptions about discipleship?
Yeah, this was interesting and one that really stood in contrast to what I was familiar with. I grew up in the church. I was familiar with the steps, especially in the Wesleyan church back when I grew up. You demonstrated certain knowledge-based items. You had a profession of faith. You were baptized. You then could become a member of the church. And then as a member, you could enjoy certain aspects of the church in a more rich and more deep way. and all churches have some sort of membership requirement. Um, but this focused more on belonging first and finding a place of commonality, and then from that place, obedience and disciple making sort of spiraled. And so it really was interesting to watch this happen, to read the evidences of that internationally, where belonging was actually part of the culture already. But here in America, where we're so individualistic, where if an individual was to be asked, where do you feel like you really belong, where you can really be yourself, or you can really experience being who you are around other people, where do you feel welcomed? I think we might be hard pressed to answer that question. I know I would, as someone who's introverted and someone who is part of this individualistic Western world. Where are my people? And so recognizing that Discovery Bible Study not only provides tremendous spiritual progress for those who participate, but also here in America, especially as participants begin to share in this study, that belonging aspect was wildly important. And that actually sort of maybe took a little bit of training for those who participated to understand that this maybe, at least if I speak for myself, I don't do the best job of being transparent and vulnerable and open with those around me. And I especially find it difficult myself personally to trust other people. But to find a community where I belong, that belonging allowed me to flourish so much more than I had previously. And participants reflected the same conclusions.
Yeah, so a focus of DMM is ordinary believers becoming disciple makers. Why do you think so many Christians assume they're not qualified? And how does the Discovery Bible Study process address that?
Wow, this is a big one, especially here in the West, where we have this elite group of paid professional Christians, where I think the typical concern is, well, someone out there is more well trained than I. Someone has better answers than I do. So let's introduce them to this pastor, this small group leader, listen to this podcast. And there's sort of an outsourcing of what really God has called us to do. But the interesting thing is, he never called us to be the best trained or the most knowledgeable or the one who has all the answers. He just calls us to be witnesses. And so I love how Discovery Bible Study makes this tangible and attainable. One of the questions we ask at the end of Discovery Bible Study is not only what will I do with this information, what will I do with our conversation, but who's someone that I could tell? And it's a simple spiritual truth that may be gleaned from a Discovery Bible Study, but that simple spiritual truth now takes a life of its own because it's in the life of someone else. So now I'm delivering not just a theoretical doctrinal position. I'm telling somebody this is what God has done in my life, and I'm witnessing what he's done to me and in me and through me to someone else. And so now all of a sudden, I don't have to be the most skilled at explaining the full counsel of God. I don't have to know the ins and outs of the Old and the New Testament, but I do know that I've met God and I know He's worked in my life and I know He's changed me in a way that someone else may find value in as well. And so all of a sudden, the barriers to what we used to call evangelism, talking to people about Jesus Christ, have been lowered, where really the only thing that I need to qualify me is that I've encountered the living person of Jesus Christ and I've experienced him. And through that experience and through what I've seen in his word and what I'm learning, I can just share that with someone else. And it makes it so much more attainable and replicable. We find that every single person that participated in the study could pinpoint at least one time where they were able, without any difficulty or fear, to take what God was doing in their lives and share it with someone else. So now all of a sudden we've got an empowered group of believers, of attenders, of members, of whatever you might want to call it, that people typically would use in the church. Just an empowered group of people who've met Christ and are sharing him with other people. Very achievable. It was incredible, the results.
So an original aspect of your research is studying DMM in a Wesleyan context. Um, but you say the emphasis on discipleship really is nothing new. The phrase you use is retrieval rather than replacement. How did the practices you studied resemble historic Wesleyan discipleship?
This was another one that really started to grow in awareness in my mind. I kept just sensing this phrase, maybe we don't need to redesign or reinvent these elements of discipleship. We just need to rediscover them. Imagine my shock when I've grown up in the Wesleyan church, born into the Wesleyan church, always attended a Wesleyan church, and here 44 years later, I feel like I'm just coming to grips with the rich traditions and history we have as Wesleyans, that John Wesley had these methods of getting people connected together, but also to Christ, and of empowering the average person to do the work of the gospel. I was 3 decades on until I understood and heard that John Wesley grouped people in societies and in classes, and then more closely in bands. And so societies were like what we would consider a large church meeting, and classes were like what we would consider a discovery Bible study, that 12 to 15 people, or what maybe people would kind of use as a Sunday school class size. And those groups came with questions of accountability and how to support one another, and questions that were very revealing, that John Wesley expected from their engagement with these classes. But imagine my shock even more that John Wesley formed these bands of 3 to 5 people that were very, very focused, not just on individual growth, but on everyone's growth spiritually together. So here I am in my 40s participating in a John Wesley band with you together for the first time in my life. So since I was a participant in this study, as I've been studying disciple making movement for all these years, I thought, I've got a pretty good handle on this. No, that was not the case. So now I find myself in a Wesley band for the first time, thinking, why is this not standard in every Wesleyan church, to walk in the footsteps of John Wesley and expect this deep, deep level of accountability and a deep level of commitment to one another? And I think recognizing that there are Wesleyan discipleship elements that perfectly overlap with the disciple making movement, and that maybe, in fact, it's not about looking elsewhere to see what new items we could create for the church to disciple in the 21st century, but maybe just retrieving what we already had access to that really demonstrated a profound effect then, and I think in our Western culture is that it's ripe now for the exact same thing.
So if a Wesleyan pastor listening today wanted to take one practical step toward cultivating a disciple-making culture, where would you encourage them to begin?
Yeah, this is a great question. Super practical. Um, Once people started to realize that disciple making movements were heard about and hoped for and starting to pop up around the United States. They did a study in 2020 that discovered over 1,000 churches. Of those 1,000 churches, less than 5% had a reproducible, clearly defined disciple-making culture. And so there's a um, pretty stark statistics that they found in 2020. Since then, they've seen that there has been an increase, which is good news in the disciple making world. But typically, the model is a little bit different here in the Western world than it is internationally. And the first thing that is suggested, number one, is just prevailing prayer. Typically, um, pastors that have been moved with a desire to see a disciple making culture embraced within their ministry is to collect a group of people around them that they know have hearts that beat in the same way. And committing to 3 to 5, maybe 6 months of really significant prevailing prayer, not just on what could be done, but also who would come along on that journey. And there are several churches in the United States who have undergone this process and are now seeing the fruit from these initial efforts. And so prayer is such a foundational element. No, uh, once the research was done internationally, no disciple making movement ever began without just committed deep prayer. And in the West, we're finding that there are people who God has really began lighting a blaze in their hearts with the ardor of disciple making. And so collecting these people and committing to prayer and then watching what God does. It really is more about spending time with him and seeing where he's moving than any programmatic element.
And to her credit, our pastor, Natasha Dungell, did exactly that before beginning the church that we were part of. Um, about 6 months, maybe even a little bit more, of just meeting with a core group and just praying. And I say that phrase just praying, but obviously there's a pretty heavy lift in that and a lot of confirmation of what really needs to happen and what the spirit really desires to happen. Um, well, you observed several tensions surrounding DMM practices. What were the biggest concerns participants raised, and how do you suggest churches navigate them?
Yeah, great question. I wished, and even at the beginning, I thought, this is going to go so smoothly. It's going to be absolutely textbook and amazing. But the trouble is that the disciple making movement, although very mature in the international world, is still very much in its infancy here in the United States. And so everybody who's engaging in this really unique culture, they're all contributing to a grand experiment to see, do we have to use the exact same elements of disciple making that are used internationally, or do we have to hybridize those just a little bit? And so some of the tensions were very revealing. Many participants revealed the difficulty they had in explaining what they were participating in to family members, friends, other church members that maybe they had attended church with before, that even in religious circles, it seemed like a foreign concept. Participants recorded people saying, well, it sounds like you're just in a Bible study, not an actual church. Or a couple reported shockingly that some people outside of the church said, well, this kind of sounds like a cult. And it reminded me of the the criticism that was lodged from the people outside of the church in the book of Acts. What are these love feasts? What are these people actually doing? They seem so committed to one another. So there was a little bit of tension with sort of just religious perception. It made us reconsider, I think, everyone, what constitutes a church? What are the characteristics? What are the biblical expectations of a church? Also, it brought a little bit of tension with the culture itself, with the sort of the individualistic Western culture, to have a group that's in a spiritual family that's so connected and so committed to sharing, really in the investment of one another's lives, that we all are growing toward Christ. And um, people outside the church, just culturally, would say that this is a strange thing to demonstrate vulnerability and dependency on one another and dependency on God. And a few participants commented about how they brought friends or acquaintances, people they knew, to a Discovery Bible study, and the people they brought were shocked. We can't believe people are opening up like this. They share so much of themselves, and um, one person described it as, this is too intimate. This is too close. And so there's a little bit of tension there. There was some tension, I think, ecclesiology wise, in maybe how do churches operate and who's qualified to do what within a church. Typically, it's been very common in the Wesleyan church. There's a process that you demonstrate some faithfulness in certain areas before you can do other things. And so maybe a question like, if somebody's visiting, do we allow them to partake in communion if we don't know where they stand with the Lord? Or um, is there someone disqualified to facilitate a discussion, or what is required for someone to facilitate a discussion? So there were some tensions that arose, and really, in looking back, it wasn't surprising because this is a truly countercultural model, just like the gospel itself is countercultural. So I think navigating those, to the great credit of our pastor, who was bold and walked with confidence and boldness and the anointing of the Holy Spirit. I think the uh, way to prepare as a pastor who may be engaging in this direction is just to know that the tensions come and you have your responses that you work out. And I think sometimes the conclusion was, if someone finds it difficult to understand, that already has a church home, maybe this is not for them, but is there someone who is super committed to making disciples and hungry enough to see where's God moving in this world and how can I join up with what he's doing? With those, the tensions seem to be secondary and not preventative, but still part of the process.
And I would also add that our pastor was all in on DMM, and DBS really was the focal point, of everything that happened with the church. That is not the case necessarily in other churches. And you and I have seen where, for instance, some questions that Discovery Bible Study uses would be sort of infused into a sermon, as an example, and there would be interaction with the people. I've also seen where DBS is used as something completely separate within a church, like on a Tuesday evening. And so it is not the Sunday thing, but it is nonetheless engaged in and can be very effective. So I think that there are different sort of hybrids, lots of different possibilities for those who are considering this.
I
Uh,
would agree. Yeah.
so after completing this research, what do you now believe is the greatest discipleship challenge facing the American church?
Mm. Even as you were asking that question, I heard in my mind, am I willing to be inconvenienced? I I think maybe within the Western world, especially within the church world, are we willing to really give whatever is required to make disciples and fulfill the Great Commission? I have been in the church world my whole life, and I I think I have passively engaged in the church world a great deal in my life. So I think first and foremost, when it comes to um, what might be the greatest hindrance to disciple making in the Western world, maybe I'm the greatest hindrance to disciple making in the Western world. Maybe as far as my world is concerned, maybe those in my world are waiting for me to become the disciple maker that I'm supposed to be. We have lots and lots of cultural reasons, economic reasons, social reasons, religious reasons. Distrust of institution is high. We live, as you have done so much research and are so well versed in, tremendous population of non-verts, ex-evangelicals, nuns, and all those labels seem to fall off when somebody encounters the person of Jesus Christ or encounters someone who carries his presence. And so I think we look at statistics, we're in a really difficult place. But all throughout history, nations have been in difficult places. Countries where the disciple-making movement have thrived are closed to the gospel with punishments that are severe for believing in Jesus Christ. And yet the viral spread of something worth believing in is tremendous. So I don't think America is lost yet. I think that there are tremendous opportunities now to really look and evaluate how is the effort toward spreading the gospel in our church really going and what is it yielding? Possible that we could increase our support of making disciples and really hone our energies and our investments into doing just that and watching the fruit that God would bring from that. I think that's the overall message that I witnessed, that I participated in, and I believe positively for the future of the church. It doesn't look good for the church that we've been practicing for a number of reasons that are external to the church. But there are many good reasons to believe in some really optimistic, I think, potentials and futures for the church, especially when it comes to disciple making.
Well, thanks, Scott, for sharing your research and congratulations again.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I just honestly never miss an opportunity to thank you for your guidance and your help. I remember at the very beginning, you said, this is a really narrow topic and a really narrow area of research, which it is, and especially in the Wesleyan Church. But I think what it yielded was exactly what is needed for the world today. And I also never want to miss an opportunity to praise and honor our pastor who was bold enough to not just think about this, not just study it, but to live it. And because of that, I know has impacted you and I and a myriad of others so deeply. And the real harvest from that and the real results are yet to fully be seen. And so for all of that, I'm grateful. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart.